My brother thinks he deserves half of my inheritance. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. So, here's the deal. My mom passed away last year, and it's been a tough adjustment. She was the glue of the family, the kind of person who made you believe everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. She worked hard her whole life, and while we were never rich, she always managed to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. After the funeral, it came out that Mom had a will. She left her house, her savings, and a small piece of land she inherited from her parents. All to me. I was surprised. My younger brother, Jake, was even more surprised. And by surprised, I mean furious. "I can't believe this," he said when the lawyer read the will. "Why would she leave everything to you? I'm her son too." For context, Jake's never been the most responsible person. While I've been working 2 jobs and paying my own way since I was 19, Jake's the kind of guy who always seems to have an excuse. Lost another job? My boss hated me. Late on rent again? My roommate screwed me over. I've bailed him out more times than I can count. But now, with Mom's will, it wasn't about bailing him out anymore. Jake felt entitled to half of everything she left me. "You don't need all that money," he told me the day after the reading. "You're already doing fine. I'm the one who could really use it." And that's where this whole mess begins. After the initial shock of the will settled in, Jake did what Jake always does. He started working angles. At first, it was subtle. Little comments slipped into our conversations. "Hey, Mom always said she wanted us to share everything equally. You've got a good job and a steady life, bro. I'm barely scraping by. Mom wouldn't want me to struggle while you're sitting on all that inheritance." It was exhausting. Every time I talked to him, I felt like I was being guilt-tripped into giving him half of what Mom left me. And honestly, part of me felt bad. I mean, he is my brother. But then I'd remind myself, Mom made this choice. She knew Jake. She knew me. This wasn't some oversight. It was intentional. Then Jake escalated. He started bringing up stuff from our childhood. "Remember when you went to college, and I had to stay home and help Mom because we couldn't afford for both of us to go? Don't you think I'm owed something for that?" For the record, he wasn't helping Mom when I was in college. He was busy getting fired from his third part-time job and spending his evenings playing Xbox in the basement. But Jake has this talent for rewriting history to make himself the martyr in every scenario. The real tipping point came when he showed up at my house one Sunday morning, uninvited, holding a manila folder. "I've been talking to a lawyer," he said, flopping onto my couch. "And he thinks I have a case." "A case? Against me? Over our Mom's will?" I stared at him for a long second before responding. "Jake, are you seriously planning to sue me?" He shrugged, trying to look casual but failing miserably. "It's not like I want to, but I've got rights, man. Family rights. Family rights. Oh boy, if only that were the end of it." Spoiler. It wasn't. Jake left my house that day with his manila folder clutched to his chest like it was the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I sat on my couch for a solid hour afterward, just simmering. Was my own brother really about to drag me into court over our mother's will? A week later, I got an email. Sure enough, Jake had officially lawyered up. The email was from his attorney, a guy whose name sounded like he either sold used cars or advertised on daytime TV. Something like Randy Steele, Defender of Justice. Real subtle stuff. The email basically said Jake was contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity. In other words, he was claiming that I somehow manipulated Mom into leaving me everything. Mom wasn't of sound mind when she made her will. Now, let me tell you something about my mom. She was sharp. Right up until the very end. This wasn't a woman who forgot birthdays or left the stove on. She had her finances organized down to the penny. I'm talking spreadsheets, labeled folders, and handwritten notes with arrows pointing to sticky notes. The lack of capacity claim was laughable. And as for undue influence? Yeah, I didn't even live in the same state as Mom when she wrote the will. But hey, when you've got a little brother desperate for cash and a lawyer named Randy Steele whispering sweet nothings in his ear, I guess logic takes a back seat. I called my own lawyer. Shout out to Susan, an absolute powerhouse of a woman who sounds like your favorite aunt, but could probably crush a watermelon with her bare hands. Susan, I said after forwarding her the email. How worried should I be about this? She laughed. Actually laughed. Not very, she said, but it's going to be annoying. And boy, was she right. The next few weeks were a circus. Legal documents started flying back and forth. Jake's lawyer asked for medical records, financial statements, even emails between me and Mom. Jake himself started posting these passive-aggressive Facebook statuses. Stuff like, funny how some people forget about family when there's money involved. It was exhausting. But then came the day we had to actually meet in mediation, face-to-face, in a small, beige conference room with too bright lighting and too weak coffee. That's when things got really interesting, so there we were. Me, Jake, my lawyer Susan, queen of calm and competence, and Jake's lawyer, Randy Steele, who, no joke, wore a Bluetooth headset the entire time like he was expecting a very important call from the president. Jake walked in looking like he had rehearsed this moment in the mirror all morning. He was wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and had this smug, self-assured smirk plastered across his face. I could tell he thought this was his moment. The mediator, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Carol, started off with some speech about finding common ground and preserving family relationships. Jake nodded along, looking solemn, as if he wasn't the one who escalated this to lawyers. Then Carol asked Jake to explain his side. He cleared his throat and launched into what I can only describe as the world's worst TED Talk. Mom always said she wanted things to be fair between us. I was there for her when OP was off living his life. I struggled while he thrived. And I don't think this will reflect her true wishes. Carol nodded politely and asked, do you have any evidence that your mother was coerced or that her mental state was compromised when the will was written? Jake froze. I swear. I could see the gears in his brain grinding to a halt. Finally, he said, well, no, but, isn't it obvious? Susan leaned forward, calm as ever. Jake, did you know your mother's lawyer recorded a video of her signing the will and explaining her decisions? The color drained from Jake's face. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that? My mom's lawyer, bless her meticulous soul, had recorded a video during the signing of the will, specifically to prevent this exact situation. In the video, Mom was sitting upright, wearing her favorite cardigan, and speaking clearly. She said, I love both of my sons, but Jake has made choices that show he can't handle responsibility. I know OP will honor my wishes and take care of what I've built. Jake's lawyer visibly deflated. Even Randy Steele's Bluetooth headset seemed to lose signal for a moment. But Jake? Oh, Jake wasn't done. He slammed his hands on the table and stood up. This isn't fair. You don't need all of that money. OP, you're just being greedy. Carol held up her hand. Mr. Jake, please sit down. But he was on a roll now. You've always been the favorite. You got the better childhood. You got the better life. And now you get everything. And then, I kid you not, he stormed out of the room. Like a toddler who didn't get the last cookie. Randy Steele cleared his throat, adjusted his Bluetooth headset, and muttered, we'll, be in touch. Then he followed Jake out the door. Susan turned to me and said, deadpan, well, that went well. But if you think that was the end of Jake's antics, oh no, my friends, we were just getting started. After the mediation meltdown, Jake went radio silent. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought he might have finally accepted reality. But with Jake, silence is never a good sign. It usually means he's plotting. 2 weeks later, I got a heads up from my cousin Emily that Jake had been running his mouth at family gatherings. Apparently, he'd decided that if the legal route wasn't going to get him half the inheritance, the next best thing was to rally the court of family opinion. I showed up at Uncle Rob's backyard barbecue already bracing for impact. Sure enough, Jake was holding court near the cooler, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, telling anyone who'd listen how I had stolen what was rightfully his. He painted himself as the victim of some great injustice, spinning stories about how he'd been Mom's caretaker, he wasn't, how I had abandoned the family, I hadn't, and how Mom must have been manipulated into her decision, she wasn't. It was surreal watching him perform. He'd always had a flair for dramatics, but this was next level. What Jake didn't count on was that most of our family knew him, and me pretty well. Aunt Linda politely excused herself mid-monologue, and Uncle Rob eventually shut him down with a no-nonsense lecture about respecting Mom's wishes. But Jake wasn't done. After the barbecue, he started posting cryptic rants on Facebook. Stuff like, "It's always the ones closest to you who betray you the most," and "Some people value money more than family." Classic vague booking. At first, I ignored it. But then he took things further. He sent me a text late one night saying I'd regret this. It felt like a threat, but honestly, I was too tired to care. I was ready for this whole ordeal to just end. But Jake wasn't ready to let go. And in his final act of desperation, he crossed a line I never expected him to cross. I wish I could say Jake's dramatic Facebook posts and backyard monologues were the peak of his antics. But no, he had one last card to play, and it was the lowest one in the deck. One Saturday morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls and frantic texts from my neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez. She's this sweet older lady who's lived next door to Mom's house for years. The message read, "There's someone messing around in your mom's house. I think it's your brother." My stomach dropped. Mom's house had been empty since she passed. I hadn't sold it yet, and I'd been going over there occasionally to keep it clean and maintained. But Jake? He had no business being there. I jumped in my car and drove over, heart pounding the entire way. Sure enough, Jake's rust bucket of a car was parked in the driveway. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was chaos. Boxes had been opened, papers scattered across the floor, drawers pulled out of cabinets. Jake was in the living room, surrounded by piles of Mom's things. He was holding one of her jewelry boxes, muttering to himself. When he saw me, he froze. For a brief moment, we just stared at each other. Then he had the audacity to smile. "Oh, hey, bro. I was just checking some things. In Mom's house. That he broke into." I didn't yell. I didn't lose my temper. I just said, "Jake, you need to leave. Right now." But Jake didn't move. Instead, he launched into yet another speech. How he was just taking what was his, how I didn't need all of this, and how Mom would have wanted him to have these things. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was about Jake's pride, his inability to accept that Mom had made her choice and that choice didn't favor him. I told him again, calmly but firmly, to leave. When he still didn't, I pulled out my phone and started dialing the police. That got him moving. He shoved the jewelry box into his backpack, muttered something I couldn't hear, and stormed past me out the door. I stood in the middle of the mess he'd made, shaking with anger and exhaustion. Later, when I reported the break-in to the police, I didn't press charges. Maybe I should have, but despite everything, he was still my brother. But that day changed something. I realized Jake wasn't going to stop until he hit rock bottom, and I couldn't be the one keeping him from it anymore. I locked up Mom's house, filed for a formal restraining order to keep Jake away from the property, and decided it was time to sell the house and close this chapter for good. But before I could do that, Jake had one last move left, and it was the most pathetic one yet. After the break-in, I thought Jake had finally run out of steam. I mean, where do you go from breaking into your late mother's house? But Jake, in true Jake fashion, had one last desperate move up his sleeve. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from my realtor, Karen. She's one of those no-nonsense types, perfectly styled hair, clipboard always in hand, and a laser focus on closing deals. We have a problem," she said cautiously. Apparently, someone had posted a Craigslist ad about Mom's house. An ad that said the house was abandoned and free to anyone willing to clean it out. It included photos of the interior, ones Jake must have taken during his little scavenger hunt, and even directions on how to get in. You can imagine the chaos. People had shown up with trucks, ready to haul away furniture, appliances, and whatever else wasn't bolted down. Thankfully, Karen had shown up for a pre-scheduled walkthrough and managed to stop anyone from actually taking anything. But still, what the hell, Jake? I confronted him. I didn't yell. I didn't rage. I just sent him a screenshot of the Craigslist ad with one text. "This was you, wasn't it?" No response. Not even a denial. That was it for me. I called Susan, my lawyer, and told her I was officially pressing charges for the break-in and filing a restraining order against Jake personally, not just for the property. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. Jake must have realized he'd finally pushed things too far because he stopped posting on Facebook, stopped showing up at family events, and, thankfully, stopped showing up at Mom's house. The house was sold shortly after. The land was transferred, the savings were secured, and I was finally able to start closing that chapter of my life. Jake, as far as I know, is still out there somewhere. Last I heard from a cousin, he was couch surfing with a friend and complaining about how family screwed him over. Do I feel bad for him? Sometimes. He's my brother, after all. But I also know that you can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves. Mom made her choice. She trusted me to handle things because she knew Jake wasn't capable. And honestly, she was right. So yeah, my brother thought he deserved half of my inheritance. Spoiler alert, he didn't. And he never will. What would you do in a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments.